Bigfoot, Sasquatch, Booger, whatever you want to call it, it's real. Back in the late 80s, after graduating from an Illinois college, I had moved back home as my father was going through some pretty terrible health problems, and I felt a family obligation to stay close to home, at least until he would hopefully get better. It was the right thing to do. Finishing at the top of my class and receiving a master's degree in business administration, I had a few prospects in the private sector near my tiny hometown, including the hospital my father was currently residing. That would be ideal, as I could visit more often. But the process was slow. Decision makers were reevaluating budgets. They'd get back to me. In the meantime, my family had contacted a good friend of the family, and he helped land me a job at a local winery. Part of the time, I would work on the sales floor, and the other times, I would work the operations side. None of this had anything to do with my degree, obviously. If I mentioned my state, it would be pretty easy to connect the dots to the winery I worked at. Out of courtesy and respect for my dear friends who still work there and I keep in touch with frequently, I'm going to withhold that information. This was all alien to me because my only experience with wine was generally just drinking it. By the way, they did give me a nice discount for every case I purchased. I asked a lot of questions. It was just my nature, and so by the owner's request, whenever they made wine, I was to be present to watch the process. One evening, as operations in the winery were wrapping up, part of my job since I was closing was to dump the pulp from the grapes away from the building and near the tree line. Apparently the deer liked the fermented grapes. I suppose at the time it must have been the easiest way to dispose of it. As sunset was approaching, I had just dropped off my final load and was about to head back and shut the bay doors when I felt like a rock hit me square in the back, right between the shoulder blades. As rocks go, I would say it wasn't large, but it definitely stung, and of course I yelled. I searched the woodline for my offender. Nothing. I yelled into the woods. Funny, that hurt, by the way. Almost everyone had left for the evening except for the maintenance engineer, Carl. Carl was a friendly old guy and was the third employee hired at the winery when they broke ground. He could tell by the expression on my face that something was off. "Something wrong, Jay?" he asked. "Yeah, somebody just hit me in the back with a rock, and it hurt." "What? Where?" I kind of felt like old Carl was taking it personal. I think he felt a sense of ownership as well, and maybe a protector to me. After all, girls should be treated with more respect than being hit with a rock, right? I was dropping off the pulp at the spot by the woods and on my way back down here. They might be trespassers. I'll go check it out. Say, you want to come? Yeah, I think maybe I will. Okay, give me a minute to bring the truck around. It was now pitch dark out, and as we climbed into the truck, Carl kept the lights off, proceeding slowly towards what I would call the pulp pile. Pointing over the dash, Carl says, "Watch this. I'm going to light up that whole area with my floodlights. That'll scare the shit out of them for sure." But Carl's plan with the truck's floodlights wasn't as cut and dry as he thought. I'm sure we were both smirking, thinking we just might catch a couple of jerks in the act, or even trespassing, maybe even vandalism. Instead, as Carl stopped the vehicle and turned off the ignition, we decided to sit for a few minutes with our windows rolled down, just listening for any kind of noise. There. Do you hear it? Okay. 3, 2, 1. Headlights and fog lights flipped on. The pulp spot and surrounding area was illuminated, and what we saw made us both kind of gasp as we both observed something very large, hairy, and staring right back at us. Halfway squatting over the pile of fermented pumice, it had its two massive hands cupped together and full of the crushed grapes. Its mouth was covered in the skin and juices of those grapes, and in my opinion, it looked evil. I could see large yellow teeth as it licked its lips from the pumice. Throughout most of its body, it was gray-haired in color. Its eyes were wide, almost bewildered, but kind of bloodshot too. He was caught off guard, and so were we. I had mixed feelings as to its face. Was this some kind of ancient man or evolved ape? The hair was excessive, and most of its body was covered. Oh my God, let's get out of here now. Carl wasn't responding. I can never be certain, but as it spun around and dropped the remaining pulp, it attempted to leave, but did so awkwardly. Maybe it was temporarily blinded by the lights of the truck, or maybe it was downright snookered off those grapes, because it lumbered off at kind of a crooked angle and hit head first into the nearest tree. In doing so, it let out a frustrated growl and shook that tree, as I recalled hearing a heavy rustling of leaves above our heads, and then something heavy bounced onto the truck's hood, smashing the window and then rolling off onto the ground. I screamed at the top of my lungs to Carl, "Go, go, go!" As he finally put it in reverse and sped backwards down the property, Carl kept muttering something to himself. It was unintelligible to me. Maybe he was praying. We were probably only 300 to 400 yards from the front parking lot and entrance to the winery. Pretty shaken up, we both sat there, speechless. "Jay, I'm not ashamed to admit it, but I've relieved myself and need to change. Would you help me lock up?" I agreed, turning on every light as I checked and locked each door. And when he came back, he opened the door to his pickup and reached under his seat, pulling out a rifle. I've lived here all my life, and I've never seen anything like that. I don't know what it is, but I'm going to ask you to please keep this to yourself. We didn't see nothing, and nothing happened. And with that being said, I happen to live a few miles away on the other side of those woods we just left, and where that thing went back in. My wife is home alone, and I need to get to her. "Go, Carl. I won't say anything. Do you want me to come with you?" "No, kid. I know now that I can't take on that responsibility, especially if something were to happen again. Christ, that thing already dropped half a tree on my hood. I'm prepared to give him some lead if he comes near my house. Listen, I've got to go." I got in my car and watched Carl speed away. I remember not being able to think straight for a while, but I eventually started the car and drove home. I quietly opened the door to the house, said a quick hello to my mother, and went straight to my room, skipping dinner. I must have had an adrenaline rush as I was lightheaded and sweaty. I slept a fitful sleep, thinking of old Carl and if he was okay. The next morning, my shift at the winery didn't start till 11, but I was so anxious to find out if Carl was okay that I went in early. Pulling into the parking lot, there was a small crowd of our co-workers, including the owner, standing by Carl's truck, staring at the mangled front end and shattered window. I was feeling emotional and just wanted to jump out of the car and tell everyone what had happened, but I couldn't. Carl feared he could lose his job, and as he stood stone-faced next to our boss, he suddenly gave me a wink and a nod, kind of like, all is well. After the crowd dispersed, I rolled off a dozen questions, with the first one being, "What happened after I left?" Well, thank God, nothing. I got to the house, set my rifle down on the porch, and checked on Shirley. Everything seemed okay, so I lied and told her I'd already had dinner and that I was just going to sit on the porch and have a smoke. Well, one smoke turned into a pack, and I sat out there until around 11 o'clock. I heard noises, but I couldn't say they were anything other than the typical wildlife. Who knows? Maybe that thing was half lit and was going to go sleep it off. Listen, I went back up there this morning. I couldn't sleep. I'd wished I'd had a camera. There were footprints all over that little clearing. Really? And the tree that hit my truck? It's not there. You want to know why? Because there were 2 different sizes of footprints all over that clearing. I think that thing shook another one out of the tree. I'll tell you what, I can't afford to pay for a front end. I wonder if my insurance will believe a deer did all this. Everyone here does. Many thanks to my friend Jay over on Instagram. She commented on one of my random subject posts, and I in turn asked her if she'd like me to interview her. While she declined on the interview, she did send me her encounter story. I hope you all enjoyed it. And speaking of interviews, I've got one I think you'll like coming up next week when I talk to Michael from the Instagram page The Drawings of Bigfoot. He's not only a great artist, he's a researcher too, and he has a great story to tell. So stay tuned for Bigfoot's Wilderness Podcast, episode number 4, coming out next week. Thanks, and please stay safe, and remember to watch out for your family, friends, and neighbors in these unusual times. Have a great night.